You can't be a white Catholic because white is a completely different operating system. It's a racial operating system that does not believe in logos. It believes your behavior is determined by DNA, and the Catholic Church will never accept that. There's a culture that is Catholic that is not the same as the culture that is Protestant. And you have all of this literature and all of this history and all this tradition that will give you a strong identity. Now, if you leave that, which is what happened to the Protestants, because Protestantism has evaporated, you don't have an identity anymore.
Hi everyone, it's Alexis here. I just wanted to say that this episode is actually an edited version because YouTube. If you would like to listen to the whole interview that I had with Dr. E. Michael Jones, you can find that in the description below to my Substack. You can also listen to it on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts and I think every other platform that you can listen to podcasts to. And so without further ado, here's the interview I had with Dr. E. Michael Jones. You were fired from a Catholic college for being too Catholic. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I got a job at St. Mary's College in 1979. I arrived on campus. They loaded me down with all these teaching courses. And at that point, I was exposed, I think for the first time, to the Right to Life movement. I left the country right after Roe versus Wade made abortion legal. Came to South Bend. It was much more Catholic in many ways than Philadelphia. People were heavily involved in the Right to Life movement. And I started to take it seriously. So I wrote editorials for the local newspaper when we had a local newspaper in South Bend. And it got my colleagues upset. See, when I met these people at the MLA convention, I asked them, what's the relationship between feminism and Catholicism? Now, what God had me do at this point was carry a folding bicycle into the interview. And they were so taken by the folding bicycle, they forgot to answer my question. They asked me if I could unfold my bicycle instead. So I said, sure. But now I found out that there was a relationship, and it was basically the feminists had taken over St. Mary's College, and anyone who disagreed with feminism was in trouble. So after this was published, the first year they wanted to renew my contract. They said I had a 10-year contract, which means 6 years, but they renewed it after 1 year. And the chairman of the department came and said, many people are upset about your stand on abortion. And I was shocked. I said, well, I'm against it. And besides, we have freedom of speech, academic freedom. Well, none of those things apply. And I was fired. So it was an unpleasant year. After I had to finish out the year, I had moved my family out to South Bend. I bought a house. I had a mortgage now. And it was unpleasant. So my prayer at that point was, Lord, why did you lead us out of Egypt only to perish in the wilderness? But it turns out it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I got out of academe. I did what I really wanted to do, which was be a writer. And I've done that ever since for the past 40 some years now, 45 years going on.
What do you say to those people who say that to be American, you have to be white, or to be German, you have to be white, to be Japanese, you have to be Asian, or you have to at least look it? What is the problem with that?
Yeah, the problem is, what does white mean? What does it mean? Well, I'm not white. I'm going to tell you honestly, when I grew up, my parents never used the word white to describe what we were. My father was Irish and my mother was German, and I'm still close enough to that ethnic America of the Second Republic that I never thought of that. Even though we were ethnically cleansed by blacks being brought up from the South, they moved into the Irish neighborhood, forced us out into another neighborhood, but we never really identified as white. I'm saying white is a social construct. Now, as soon as I say that, they get all upset because they think I'm Noel Ignatieff. Well, he came up with the idea. I think it was right. It is a social construct. Look at Barack Obama. Why is he black? Why is he black? His mother's white and his father's black. That means he's 50% one, 50% of the other. Why is he black? Well, because at this period of time, it was advantageous to be black. The Democratic Party was promoting this identity. They wanted to have the first black president. If it had been, let's say, 100 years before that, it would have been advantageous to say he was white. So it's a social construct. That's complicated for people. They don't quite understand that. They don't understand what that means. So what does it mean to be Asian? What does that mean? It's like, what does it mean to be European? Can you speak a few words in Asian for me? Can you? I had this lady in Germany. We were sitting there. I lived in Germany. I had this experience of being an immigrant in Germany, and that's where I learned the importance of language because I had to learn the language. You know, so we're sitting there, German couple, my wife and I, and the couple, the man is Bosnian and the woman's Italian. The only language we could speak was German. That was the only language that everyone understood there. And so the lady, the hostess says, Ich bin kein Europäer. Ich bin kein Deutscher. Ich bin Europäer. I'm not a German. I'm a European. So I said, well, say, how do you get to the where is the Bahnhof? Where is the train station in European? You can't say that. In order to be a European, you have to be one of those countries, like French, for example. In order to be an Asian, you have to be Korean or Filipino or Japanese or whatever. That's your identity, okay? That's the language you speak. That's where you get your identity. I'm saying that ultimately, race is not. What is race? What do you mean by it? Is it phenotype? Well, okay, I agree that I look different than somebody who was born in Africa. So what? Does that determine the way I think? Language determines the way I think. Doesn't my DNA does not determine that. This is something that is hard for some people to understand.
Yeah, definitely. I think even if you take the Philippines as an example, before the Spanish brought Catholicism, it was not the Philippines. There was no Philippines. It was just groups of different tribes that spoke their own languages, their own dialects, who were not always at peace with each other. They had their own customs. And what united them was when the Spanish came and brought Catholicism. And even today, I don't know exactly the percentage of how many Filipinos actually speak the national language, Tagalog. I think it's not the majority, but the dialects are still very strong. Like you have the Cebuanos in the south and Visayan, and there's a lot more. I think, and what for people who don't speak another language, because I know there are many, especially North Americans out there, who only speak English. What does a language consist of? What does it mean? What does it have that that helps us understand other cultures?
Well, it creates our categories. We have to formulate our thought. It has to have in a language. You can't think without a language, and the language will determine your categories. So when I did Logos Rising, why did I say Logos Rising? Because there's no word in English that conveys the complexity of the Greek word logos. 5 pages of equivalence in English. And so when I read the Gospel of St. John in English, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I didn't know what that meant. I have no idea what that means. What's that mean? But when I studied Greek and I suddenly realized, oh, logos, that's a whole concept. You've got now the Greek language providing categories for philosophy that no other language had, especially the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language is very concrete. And if you read the Psalms, it's, like the righteous man is like a tree planted near running water whose leaves never fade. That's not philosophical language. God is my rock. That's not philosophical language. It's not like saying that which is cannot come from that which is not, which is what Parmenides said. That's the type of thought. And so what you have is a merger of these two things in the creation of Christianity. So so if you're a Hebrew, you think differently than a Greek. And so the big challenge, let's say, is when those two groups came together in Christianity. And it was there was a struggle. basically, the Jews had to give up their ethnocentrism and admit that Greeks were not second-class citizens. And that merger created an incredible amount of energy. And the manifestation of that merger was the fact that St. John wrote his gospel in Greek. So now it's open to a whole different world. That's just one example of how your language determines how you view the world in a very important way, and in a way that your DNA does not do that. So here's a great movie you should watch. It's called The Searchers. It's directed by John Ford, and it's John Wayne, and it's a Western. It's a captivity narrative story. The captivity narrative was really important genre in America because the captivity of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson was one of the first books ever published in America. And these were English settlers living on the frontier. The Indians would sweep in and they'd capture them. And she was held captive by the Indians for a couple months, and she wrote a book about it. Okay? So once you're in that situation, you have an identity crisis. Hers wasn't as severe as the later was. The one that the movie is based on is a lady by the name of Cynthia Ann Parker, who was living in Texas. And in 1836, she was captured by the Comanches as an 8-year-old girl. And she's taken off, and she's there. The Comanches would kill all the men, but they'd take the girls, and they'd raise them, and they became part of the tribe. And she eventually married a chief, and she had 3 children by him, and she learned Comanche. Well, what are you now? What is she? So the crisis again comes 20 years later. The Texas Rangers show up, and they look at her. Obviously, the phenotype is different. Oh, you must be a white woman. And they take her and put her back, and she doesn't want to go back. That's not her identity anymore. And so the whole movie is about whiteness is a significant category in this movie. And John Wayne is a guy who believes in whiteness. And so there's one point where they're looking for girls that look like Debbie in the movie. They're obviously Caucasian girls. And they find some girls, but they're not the girl. It's not Debbie. But these are girls who have become animals because they were raised by the Comanche. It's very clear. They're kind of feral, and they can't talk. And this is the danger. So what is white? Can you lose your whiteness? Can you lose it? I think you can. And so I'm keep thinking, well, wait a minute. Your phenotype, your DNA didn't change. Maybe it's because you lose your language, which is what happened to Cynthia Ann Parker. If you can't speak to people anymore, obviously you're not part of the group. So she wanted to go back. They wouldn't let her go back. And she eventually died. And all of her descendants now get together. It's obviously half Comanche, half European. And they all get together and celebrate her life now. But she became a Comanche because of the language, because of marriage bonds. You know, a man leaves his parents, a woman leaves and becomes one in flesh with the man. That all applied there. And so what is whiteness? What is it? You know what I think it is? I think it's like virginity. You can lose your virginity. And you can lose it. You'll never get it back. And I think that's so. This whiteness is bound up with this sexual understanding of human nature, and it's such a fragile. It's a fragile thing, and it has to be maintained rigidly by customs and laws that prevent any type of mixing of the races. Because as soon as the race mix, that's the end of whiteness. I think that's basically what that story is about. And that's the struggle that John Wayne has to go through in this movie. Because once he realizes that Debbie she's a grown girl now, she's mature, may have been slept with the Indians, he's going to kill her. So the big crisis in the movie, when John Wayne finally finds Debbie, is he going to kill her or is he going to rescue her? And the climactic moment, it's a really touching moment. He picks her up and he says, "Let's go home, Debbie." So the human being won out over the white guy.
Mhm.
And that's that. I mean, that's why it's such a good movie. But it's important for identity. It's an important identity marker. And it's a kind of way. John Ford's an Irishman. He's making money in Hollywood, but he's really Irish. And I think he's looking at America as kind of this weird place where they have their weird customs and things like cowboys. So he'll go along with it, but it's kind of weird. And I think that's the triumph at the end, where you recognize the human being, even though she's been living with the Indians.
Yeah, see, I'll definitely check that out. You also said that it's one part of your identity is language, but then it's also religion, your belief.
Right.
Yeah. For people who are not, so you have Christians, you have Protestants, and atheism as well is a sort of identity. How do you think has this developed? I feel like a lot of atheists that I've known, and when I was an atheist myself, I had this sense of feeling lost, still feeling
Right.
lost. Why?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because
Why?
God is an exalted Father. Because you're alienated from your being. Because you received your being from your father and your mother. And so atheism is a psychological issue. It's not an ontological issue. You can prove the existence of God. I can prove it to you. You may be not smart enough to understand the proof, but I can prove it. It's not an article of faith. The existence of God is not an article of faith. But that's not the way we get our idea. We get our idea of God from our Father. God is an exalted Father, not your mother, your father. There's a kind of abstractness to the father that is not there with the mother. And if you have a troubled relationship with your father, you will have trouble understanding God, especially if you have a weak father. Now, the classic example of the weak father is the immigrant. This is part of the problem here, because he's a guy who was, I don't know, he was a professor over there. He was a doctor. Now he comes here. He's a different color. They won't accept his degree. He doesn't know who he is. Like that's like my grandfather, my Irish grandfather came from Ireland as a boy, started a store, was very successful, had a hardware store. He was an Irishman. He wasn't an American. My father, now I'm an American, but my father was kind of the middle generation there, where it was hard to tell one way or the other. I think he had an identity problem. The solution to this problem in America, in the United States of America, is called the triple melting pot, which is basically after 3 generations, your ethnic identity comes from your religion, because you don't speak Tagalog anymore or whatever it is, German. You speak this language, but you socialize in religious groups. And the best assimilation engine in America was the Catholic parish, the ethnic parish. Because you brought people together. You're not just throwing them as isolated individuals. You can have a Filipino parish. You can have an Irish parish, German parish, all those things. And they helped the people assimilate, and it gave them a sense that their identity was Catholic. So I think that's the real ethnic identity in America. There's no reason why you can't be a Catholic Filipino American. There's a transition. In France, it's different because it's not an immigrant country. They got their own problems. Their problem is known as the French Revolution, and that's a whole different problem. They've never gotten over it. There's this conflict between the state and the church. Anyway, that's their problem. They have a strong culture, but they still haven't gotten over the French Revolution in the same way that we have never gotten over the Reformation. In the sense, we've never gotten over that. They've never, and so, but it's there can be this identity, and it's happening. It was happening in my generation. I'm the 3rd generation. I'm American, and then it was completely disrupted in the 50s with race-based social engineering. So wait a minute. I'm Protestant, Catholic, Jew. I understand that. Well, now I got to be black and white. Now I got to be white or black. Well, I'm confused now. Which is it? Well, the government didn't want ethnic identity. It did not want that. Read my book, The Slaughter of Cities. It will go in great detail how proud the United States government tried to exterminate ethnic identity in the United States of America. And they wanted to impose their identity, and their identity was racial. Because racial identity is always a form of control, because you're always dividing people between black and white. That's why it's a form of control. And that always leads to conflict in a way that religious identity does not lead to conflict. That leads to cooperation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just to point out, my parents actually converted to Mormonism, and I think it's because yeah, I know, but I think it's because we have the same issue in the Philippines of being Americanized, but it's not the same way as when the Spanish came. It was really soft, and it was accepted, and they don't realize that they're actually if they have been Americanized.
Only in America would someone recognize something. I don't want to offend your parents, but
Oh
something
no,
as ridiculous, something as ridiculous as Mormonism,
but it
where he
is
got.
such an American religion.
You're absolutely right. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right. So I'm saying that the vector of American identity is east to west. So you start off in Massachusetts with your Calvinist Bible, and suddenly you get into the woods, and now existence modifies essence. Well, that was another example, except they were first of all, they started off in New York. Everybody hated the Mormons. And so they had to keep moving farther and farther. Whenever they settled someplace, they would be attacked, largely because of polygamy. It was one reason. Anyway,
yeah,
they end up in Utah. There's nobody in Utah. So finally, they have a place where they can live. And they're basing this religion on the golden tablets that Joe Smith seems to have mislaid. You'd think
yeah,
it's like, honey, where are the golden tablets? I put them here last night before I went to bed. Where are they now? You'd think that if it was something that important, you wouldn't mislay them. But anyway, only in America would you accept something like this as a religion.
yeah.
It would not happen anywhere in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what my husband said when he was my husband grew up atheist, and the first thing he thought of was Catholicism. But when I had met him in the beginning, I was Mormon. And he's like, I could never be Mormon. It's too American.
Good
So
for him. He
yeah,
lost
thank
his
God.
he lost his faith, but he didn't lose his reason.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. What what was I gonna say? Yeah, what is when people don't have this sense of identity, what can they do? So you talked about the Catholic Church. What is the church's stance on identity, on ethnicity, on
The church is
being white,
always on being white. Okay,
on
good.
being white?
I'm glad. I just wrote an article called Guns and Rosaries, The Rise of White Catholicism. Okay, I just wrote that. It's in the next issue of Culture Wars. I would love to have you read this
Yes, I
this
will.
thing, because I'm saying you can be a German Catholic or a Filipino Catholic or an Irish Catholic, but you can't be a white Catholic,
Hmm.
because white is a completely different operating system. It's a racial operating system that does not believe in logos. It believes your behavior is determined by DNA, and the Catholic Church will never accept that, cannot accept that, cannot accept a racial explanation of what happened at the time of Jesus Christ. There was a huge conflict at the time of Jesus Christ among the Hebrew people, but you can't explain it by DNA, can you? Because they all had the same DNA. They were all Semites at that point. So that's why you cannot accept this identity as being white. Okay. Now the crucial moment came with intermarriage. The Catholics, one of the manifestations of the triple melting pot is that Catholics marry Catholics and Protestants marry Protestants and Jews marry Jews. Well, my great Irish grandfather had 6 children. Only one married another Irishman. But they all married Catholics. And so when I say I keep saying, well, I'm biracial. I'm Irish and German, and those were legitimate terms. They were considered races in the 19th century. But it can get really confusing. I mean, there's a guy who just wrote a letter to me, and his father was Polish, Lithuanian, something or other, and his mother was Taino, Dominican, and Spaniard. So that's a really weird combination. So what are you going to call yourself? Well, they call themselves white because they didn't have a better word. And then suddenly this again, the importance of language. This is the importance of language. The term white has definite meaning in Anglo culture that it doesn't have in other cultures. So if you lack the word, what are you going to call yourself? Well, you'd have to call yourself Catholic as your ethnic identity, which means that you're, but if you look at like phenotype, like Germans and Irish, they're pretty much the same. They look pretty much the same. And so the word white starts circulating again. So that's complicated. It's complicated because of that, because of intermarriage, and because of the ultimate assimilation into your culture. So you're an American in general, and you're a Catholic or a Protestant or a Jewish American. And probably now we have to have Islamic Americans, maybe Mormon Americans, and all. You have to expand it a little bit because of the complexity. But I think that's the way you negotiate. That's where your identity comes from. I mean, there's a culture that is Catholic that is not the same as the culture that is Protestant. And you have all of this literature and all of this history and all this tradition that will give you a strong identity. Now, if you leave that, which is what happened to the Protestants, because Protestantism has evaporated, you don't have an identity anymore. And the United States culture is ready and willing to give you one for a price. So you can buy a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and they'll teach you how to dress, and you'll be able to recognize fellow Harley owners when you see them, and you kind of wave to them as you go by. Or you can buy sports clothing. You can be an Eagles fan in Philadelphia, and that means you can tear down traffic lights when they win the Super Bowl or something like that. These are all manifestations of lack of identity, or maybe identity theft.
And how does logos tie into identity?
Well, we are rational creatures. So what's the first mark of a rational creature? He speaks a language. Animals do not speak language. And so the language you get is not from the Germans call it the Muttersprache, your mother tongue, but you get it from your ethnic group. And so the condition of nature is sort of what you described with the Philippines. If you go to Africa, you have a country like Kenya has 76 different ethnic groups based on language, the language they speak. I can't tell them apart. I can't tell. Apparently, they can tell a Hutu from a Tutsi. You can tell Sudanese. They look different than Somalis. Once you get the idea, there are subtle differences, but from the outsider's point of view, they all look the same. They're all black, but they speak different languages. That's the state of nature. It's basically your ethnic group gives you your language, and your language gives you your identity.
And to continue on with logos, what is anti-logos? What is the opposite?
Irrationality. Most manifested oftentimes as an aggressive rejection of rationality, which we would call sin. And so what's the prime example of this? Satan, the devil, rejected God's plan, rose in rebellion against God, and then was struck down. Satan is the hero of Paradise Lost, which is the poem by John Milton. He was a Puritan. This is the Protestant epic. The Protestant religion is based on irrationality. In other words, that rebellion against legitimate authority, which is the essence of irrationality. And so Satan says things like, he wakes up at the beginning of Paradise Lost, They've all fallen. He's got to rally the troops. He's going to get back at God. He's got a plan. He's going to seduce Eve. He didn't tell it. We find out about that later. I am going to wreck God's plan. But he has to raise the demons. And so he says, awake, arise, or be forever fallen. Here we shall be free. That's what he says. That's exactly what the Puritans said when they arrived in Massachusetts, because they all read Paradise Lost. It's amazing how many American writers and thinkers have all read Paradise Lost and taken their identity from this satanic rejection of Logos. Jesus Christ is the Logos incarnate. You can't hate Logos without destroying yourself. And of course they do. They do destroy themselves. But the motto of America is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. That's the expression of anti-Logos that goes throughout American history through Protestantism. Look, I take to tell you this. You talk to these Protestants. A guy I knew was raised a Catholic, and then he had a traumatic experience at Notre Dame, and he became some type of evangelical. And you couldn't talk to him. You got certain points where he just would not, because he was infallible when it came to the Bible. He was infallible. Not just the Pope. Every Protestant is infallible when it comes to interpreting the Bible. And so you're going to like this story. He decides he wants to marry a Filipino. Okay. I said, I would be skeptical of this. You meet these ladies online, they're not really whom they seem to be, Type in Filipino bride. I know.
Yeah, I know.
100 articles of all these guys who got taken to the cleaners by this Filipino bride. You couldn't talk to him. So he's over in the Philippines now. He's over there now. He did it. I don't know how long he's going to be there, but he did it. This is you could not talk to this guy. Once he got this idea that God is telling me that I have to have a Filipino wife, it was over. You couldn't do it. That's the type of, and the net result of that is America becomes ungovernable according to rational principles. And so you have to manipulate the American public to engineer consent. And this is part of the whole problem with social engineering. And we're reaching that point now where people are becoming aware of the manipulation, and it's not working anymore. So now you have to throw people in jail for tweeting something that they don't like.
How did Logos Rising come about? What was the process? What made you write the book?
Two things. I had to use the word Logos for the Jewish revolutionary spirit. The second one was going to Iran. There was a 10-year period where I was going to Iran on a kind of regular basis. And it's the first time I'm exposed to a culture that it's not Christian, it's Muslim. Although the Shia, the Persians, are a different kind of Muslim, and I found that out. So the question is, can I have a conversation with someone from a completely different culture? And if so, what would the basis be? And that's where I had to come back to Logos. The most fundamental aspect of a human being is rationality, and the most fundamental manifestation of that rationality is speech. And now we have a situation where people all over the world speak English, so we can have a sophisticated conversation. So I was hoping to go back to Iran and talk about important things like sex. I wanted to talk about sex in Iran because there's a big crisis in Iran right now over sexual identity. Not that they're, all flaming lesbians, but they have in 1989, the Ayatollah Khomeini died. It was 10 years after the revolution, and his successor came in and decided to continue the revolution, but he introduced birth control with a catastrophic effect. It was the biggest plummet in fertility in birth control history. And so now you come into a culture that is outwardly very traditional because they're all wearing the chador and the hijab. You have to wear that. But inwardly they have birth control pills, and that's gnawing away at the inside, and there's a contradiction. All the women feel this contradiction. And I addressed it. I said it flat out. I was speaking to the Basiji, the women's, the Revolutionary Guard. The ladies who all march down the street with AK-47, but white gloves. You wear white gloves when you hold your AK-47. It lends that feminine touch to the AK-47. But I said, throw away your birth control pills. And our eyes all lit up and like, this guy understands. This guy understands what's going on. And I was hoping that we'd have this discussion, but now it's on war footing. Everything, they're waiting any minute for the bombs from Israel to start dropping on their nukes. It's not conducive right now to having that discussion. I hope it will be eventually, because I really think that we have a lot to talk about. It's a very sophisticated culture. It's based on poetry, the greatest poetry in the world. The one thing the Iranians did not do is they did not adopt Arabic as their language. After the Arab conquest, the country went silent for 2 centuries until finally Ferdowsi, the great poet, wrote the longest poem in the world, and there's not one Arabic word in the entire poem. It's all Farsi. And that created Persian identity to this day. To this day. So when you get to know the Persians, you talk to them after a while, and then they let you in on the secret, which is basically Ferdowsi thought that the Arab conquest, that Islam was the greatest catastrophe to ever hit Persia. And so they have this dual identity, firmly rooted. The language is what determines Persian identity, specifically Persian poetry. Hafez, great poetry. Goethe thought, we wrote their Ostwestliche Divan, because as a tribute to this great poetry. That's their identity. This is why I keep saying language is what, this language is at odds with their religion. It's a protest against Islam that still exists. So they introduced me to the Ayatollah Shahrud, a very important guy in recent Persian history. First thing out of his mouth is complaining about the Saudis and how they're all a bunch of, this is not real Islam, they're all a bunch of barbarians. They still have that sense because of their language, because they did not capitulate and adopt Arabic as their language.
And just to wrap it up, if someone does feel lost in terms of their identity, where should they begin in rediscovering who they actually really are?
Look, ethnos needs logos. Who are you? Who would you be if the Spaniards hadn't come and conquered the Philippines and introduced you to the Catholic faith? Who would you be? You might not exist. You might not exist because I'm talking about what happened to the Guarani in Paraguay. The great story of the Jesuits showing up in Paraguay and learning Guarani and writing a Guarani dictionary and a Guarani grammar. That's what preserved that language, and that language preserved that people. So you need some form of logos. So at this point, who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you now? Where did you come from? What is the true north for every human being? It's logos. And then you have to say, well, what is the vehicle of logos in human history? Who's the one who said, ein arche, ein ha logos? Who was the one who made that the language of the Catholic faith? Well, it was the Greeks, and the Catholic faith is the vehicle of logos in human history. So no matter what you are, that's true north, because that was God coming down and establishing the true narrative, the eternal true narrative that incorporates our identity with God's identity. That's the way I would address that issue.